There are moments in life that feel less like chance and more like destiny, moments when time itself seems to hesitate, when the air grows heavy with silence, as if the universe wants you to pay attention. These are not ordinary moments. They are invitations, they are thresholds. They are the quiet whispers of fate saying, something is about to change. It was on such a day, under the fading warmth of an autumn sunset, that a young man and a young woman crossed paths. The world around them moved as always. Traffic hummed, conversations filled the air, footsteps echoed on the pavement. But for them, the noise seemed to dissolve. He walked with the heaviness of someone carrying invisible burdens. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his gaze thoughtful yet restless, as though his mind never stopped calculating, never stopped searching for something just beyond his reach. This was the look of a man who had chased many things, approval, success, admiration, but who had found little peace in what he caught. She, on the other hand, carried herself differently. Her presence was subtle, not demanding attention, yet impossible to ignore. There was a quiet grace about her, as though she was in tune with something deeper than the rush of the city. Where others hurried, she seemed to flow, moving like a soft melody woven through the chaos of noise. And then it happened. Their eyes met. It was not the kind of glance that passes quickly and is forgotten. No, it lingered, stretching into something that words could not contain. In that silent exchange, something stirred. Not merely attraction, but recognition. Recognition of something missing within themselves that, for a brief second, they glimpsed in the other. The man, who had spent years running after shadows of approval, suddenly felt a stillness settle in him, as if her gaze said, "You don't need to chase here. You can rest." The woman, who had so often hidden her strength behind silence, felt her spirit awaken under the warmth of his attention, as if his presence whispered, "I see you." Neither spoke, neither pretended, neither needed to. For the first time in a long time, they were simply present, and in that presence, something magnetic was born. Here lies a truth most people never understand. Attraction is never only about beauty or charm or clever words. True attraction arises when energies recognize one another. When one carries stillness, the other feels safe. When one radiates strength, the other feels inspired. This is not the attraction of the body alone. It is the attraction of the soul. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Perhaps that is what happened here. Two people, carrying unspoken shadows they had never dared to face, were pulled together, not by coincidence, but by the silent gravity of their inner worlds. The man felt, without reason, that she carried answers to questions he had not yet dared to ask. The woman sensed, without proof, that he carried battles she was somehow meant to understand. This was not yet the beginning of romance. Not yet. It was the beginning of awakening, because before love arrives, life often gives us something even more important: a mirror. A mirror that does not reflect the mask we wear, but the truth we hide. And sometimes the right person at the right time becomes that mirror. That evening, as the city lights blinked alive and the crowd surged forward, neither tried to hold on to the moment. They did not exchange numbers. They did not speak promises. They simply shared a small knowing smile before walking away in opposite directions. Yet something within both of them had shifted. He carried with him a spark, faint but undeniable, a question he could not silence. Why did her presence feel like home? She carried with her a warmth she had almost forgotten, a reminder that she was more than the silence she wore. And though they parted as strangers, they walked away with hearts that were no longer the same. For destiny does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it begins quietly, with nothing more than a glance that lingers too long, a silence that feels too full, and a spark that refuses to fade. It was only the beginning. Some meetings end in silence, leaving behind only a fading memory, but some are not meant to end. They are seeds, planted quietly in the soil of the heart, waiting for the right season to grow. What happened that autumn evening was one such seed. The young man tried to return to his routines. He went back to his work, his endless tasks, his carefully built plans. On the surface, nothing had changed, but within, a subtle shift had occurred. His mind, which once ran like a restless machine, now found itself pausing unexpectedly, returning again and again to the memory of her gaze. Why did it feel so steady? Why did it feel like, in that brief moment, he had finally been seen? The woman, too, returned to her quiet world. She went about her days with the same calm rhythm she had always carried. And yet in quiet moments she felt an echo in her chest, a warmth that reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. The power of being noticed, not for what she gave, not for the roles she played, but for who she truly was. Neither admitted it out loud. Neither told their friends or wrote it in journals. But both knew somewhere deep inside that something had shifted. You see, life often works this way. What the eyes see for a second, the heart can carry for a lifetime. Because when two energies recognize one another, time loses its usual rules. A single glance can feel more real than years of conversations. A moment can become a mirror, showing us a truth about ourselves that we had long ignored. For the man, the truth was this: he had been running. Running after success, after validation, after love that never quite stayed. He wore masks so skillfully that even he forgot where they ended and where he began. But in that silent meeting, he realized without words that he was tired of running. For the woman, the truth was different, yet just as deep. She had been hiding. Hiding her strength, her fire, her light, afraid the world would not understand it. She wore silence like armor, but beneath it, her spirit longed to dance free. In that brief encounter, she sensed that maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could see beyond the armor. This is the mystery of attraction. It is not always the beginning of romance, but it is always the beginning of revelation, because every person we are drawn to carries a piece of our own unfinished story. And until we face that story, the pull of the unseen will not let us go. Days passed, then weeks. The city moved forward with its usual rush, yet destiny is not bound by calendars or clocks. One evening, by what seemed like chance but was not, they crossed paths again. This time there was no golden sunset, no poetic glow. It was just an ordinary street, filled with noise, neon signs, and hurried footsteps. But when their eyes met once more, the world seemed to pause again, reminding them, this is not over. The man smiled first, hesitant yet genuine, as though asking permission to step beyond silence. The woman returned the smile, soft yet steady, as though answering a question without words. Strange, he said at last, his voice carrying the weight of weeks of unspoken thoughts. I feel like I already know you. She laughed gently, not mocking, but as if she understood. Sometimes, she replied, we recognize people before we know their names. And just like that, the distance between them dissolved. They began to walk together, slowly, without destination. At first, their words were light, about the city, about small things, about the passing of seasons. But underneath, something deeper was at work. Each word seemed to peel away a layer, as though the universe had crafted this moment not for casual conversation, but for something more. For the first time, the man spoke of his restlessness, of the way he always chased but never arrived. He did not mean to reveal so much, yet in her presence, the words slipped out as though they had been waiting all along, and for the first time, the woman spoke of her silence, not the peaceful kind, but the silence of hiding, of withholding her fire for fear it would burn too brightly. She too had not planned to share, yet his listening felt safe enough to let the words flow. This is what happens when two souls recognize one another. The walls we build so carefully begin to crumble, not with force but with gentleness, not with pressure but with presence. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And in that quiet walk, beneath the hum of streetlights and the rush of strangers passing by, two lives began to transform. They were no longer simply a man and a woman who had exchanged glances. They were mirrors, each reflecting the other's hidden truths. They were teachers, each guiding the other toward the parts of themselves they had long ignored. They were possibilities, each showing the other what life could feel like when masks are set aside. By the time they reached the end of the street, neither wanted to say goodbye, and yet neither rushed to define what was happening. It was too new, too fragile, too sacred to force into words, so instead they parted once again. But this time, they carried not just a spark but a flame. It was no longer a question of whether they would meet again. It was only a question of when, because destiny, once awakened, does not sleep. There are moments in life that seem fragile on the surface, like a candle flame trembling in the wind, and yet beneath their fragility, they carry the strength to light entire worlds. That was what their second meeting felt like. Small, simple, ordinary to anyone else who might have seen it. But for them, it carried the weight of something unexplainable. In the days that followed, the young man found himself walking the same streets, not out of habit but out of hope. He did not want to admit it even to himself, but some part of him longed to see her again. And deep down, he knew it was not mere attraction. It was the way she had listened, the way her silence was not emptiness but presence. It was the rarest gift of all, someone who made him feel like he no longer had to perform. The woman, too, found herself restless in her quiet world. For so long she had lived with the belief that no one could truly see her. People admired her grace, but they never asked about the fire hidden beneath it. They liked her silence, but they never wondered about the thoughts and battles she carried within. But he had asked without really asking. His presence had spoken it. And now she found herself waiting, wondering if destiny would cross their paths once more. And destiny did. It happened on a rainy afternoon. The kind of rain that makes the whole city blur, as though the world itself wants to remind you of the beauty of slowing down. He was standing beneath a cafe awning, watching droplets race each other down the glass. And then, through the veil of falling rain, he saw her. She was crossing the street, red umbrella in hand, her steps steady despite the storm. This time he did not hesitate. He stepped forward, calling her name not because he had ever been told it, but because in his heart he already knew it. Startled, she turned, and when their eyes met, the rain itself seemed to pause. "You," she whispered, as though the word carried both recognition and relief. They laughed at the strangeness of it all, at how life kept bringing them back together, at how impossible it seemed that chance could be so precise. And without needing to plan, they walked into the cafe together, shaking off the rain as though stepping into a new chapter. The hours that followed passed like minutes. They spoke of everything and nothing, of books they loved, of the dreams they feared to share, of the battles that had shaped them. And yet, it was not the words themselves that mattered. It was the honesty behind them. For the first time in years, both of them felt what it was like to speak without editing, to share without calculation. This is the power of true connection. It does not demand perfection. It demands presence. It does not thrive on performance, but on authenticity. And authenticity, once tasted, becomes impossible to forget. At one point, their conversation grew quiet. Not the awkward quiet that begs to be filled, but the sacred quiet that feels like a prayer. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Inside, their eyes held a conversation deeper than words could reach, and in that silence something awakened. Not a loud fire, not a sudden explosion, but a steady flame, the kind that warms rather than burns, the kind that does not ask for attention, but simply exists. The man realized in that moment that he did not feel the urge to chase her, to impress her, to prove himself. Instead, he felt at peace, and that peace was more magnetic than any desire he had ever known. The woman realized in that moment that she did not feel the urge to hide, to shrink, to dim her light. Instead, she felt seen, and being seen without fear was more powerful than any compliment she had ever received. Carl Jung once wrote that the meeting of two souls is less about possession and more about recognition, that true love is not about finding someone to complete us, but about finding someone who reminds us we were never incomplete to begin with. And perhaps that was what this was becoming, not a chase, not a transaction, but a recognition. As the afternoon gave way to evening, they finally stood to leave. Neither wanted the moment to end, but both knew that the story unfolding between them could not be rushed. It needed to breathe. At the cafe door, he paused. "Can we meet again?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying the quiet urgency of a man who knew this was not something he could afford to lose. She smiled, not the polite smile of obligation, but the kind that carries both certainty and promise. "We will," she said simply, and with that they parted once more. But this time they did not walk away carrying only questions. They walked away carrying beginnings, because now it was no longer just a spark or a flame. It was fire. Quiet, steady, inevitable fire, and destiny once set alight cannot be extinguished. There comes a point in every connection when the surface beauty fades, when the polite smiles and careful words give way to something raw, unpolished, and infinitely more powerful. For them, that moment arrived sooner than either expected. A week after their cafe meeting, they found themselves together again, not in a crowded city street, not in the noise of the world, but in the quiet of a library tucked away like a secret. It was her idea. She had always loved the silence of books, the way stories seemed to hold fragments of every soul who had ever lived, and she wanted him to see that part of her world. At first they moved through the shelves lightly, pointing out favorite titles, sharing small anecdotes. But slowly, as the hours stretched, the silence between them shifted. It was no longer the silence of discovery, it was the silence of invitation. An unspoken question hovered in the air. "Will you let me see the parts of you that no one else has seen?" The man hesitated. For so long he had worn his confidence like armor. To the world he was composed, ambitious, in control. But beneath that armor was a weight he rarely admitted, the weight of failure, of loneliness, of the fear that no matter how much he achieved, he would never feel enough. And now, standing before her, he felt that armor cracking. She noticed. She always noticed. Her eyes softened, not with pity but with understanding. And in that moment he spoke, not with rehearsed words, not with the charm he often used in the world, but with the trembling honesty of someone stepping into the unknown. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be who people expect me to be," he confessed. "Strong, successful, unshakable, but the truth is, most nights I feel like I'm drowning. I smile, I move forward, I keep pretending, but inside I wonder if anyone will ever see the real me and stay." The words hung heavy in the air. For a heartbeat he regretted them, afraid he had revealed too much. But then he saw her expression change. It was not judgment. It was relief, because she too had carried her own secret weight. "All my life," she whispered, "people have loved the idea of me. The quiet girl, the graceful one, the one who never makes trouble. They see what they want to see, but they don't know the storms I've lived through. They don't know the nights I've cried into the silence, or the anger I've swallowed just to keep the peace. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever love me when I stop being what they want." Their eyes met, and in that instant the room around them dissolved. The books, the shelves, the whispers of other readers, all faded into nothing. What remained was two souls, stripped of pretense, standing in the naked truth of their humanity, and instead of turning away, they stepped closer. There is a sacred kind of attraction that is born not from perfection, but from imperfection shared. It is the kind that says, "I see your cracks and I do not run. I see your shadows and they do not scare me. I see you and I stay." That was the fire that sparked between them now. Not the fire of desire alone, though that was there. Not the fire of charm or surface attraction, though that was there too. This was deeper. This was the fire of recognition, the kind that cannot be faked, the kind that cannot be forced. For the first time they laughed together without fear. They leaned closer without hesitation. The space between them became less like distance and more like gravity, pulling them together with every passing second. At one point, she placed her hand on a worn book spine, and he noticed the way her fingers trembled. Without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his. It was a small gesture, but it carried more weight than any declaration. It said, "You are safe here. You don't have to hide anymore." She looked at him, and in her gaze he saw the unspoken truth, "Neither do you." That evening, as they left the library, the world outside seemed transformed. The streets were the same, the city unchanged, but within them something had shifted forever. They were no longer strangers bound by coincidence. They were no longer just a man and woman sharing curiosity. They were mirrors. They were fire. They were vulnerability wrapped in trust. And yet neither of them rushed to name it. They did not need to. Some truths do not require words. They only require courage. The courage to keep showing up, to keep unveiling the layers, to keep walking into the unknown together. As they parted that night, a question lingered in the man's heart. Could this be love? But deeper still, another voice whispered, "No, it is more than love. It is awakening, and awakening once begun cannot be undone." There are moments in life that feel like they belong to a different world. Moments so alive, so powerful, that they leave you wondering if you are living or dreaming. For them, that moment arrived on a rainy evening. The city was alive with its usual chaos, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, neon lights flickering against the wet pavement. But for the man and woman, the world had narrowed down to a single umbrella they shared as the rain poured down. He held it above them, though the storm still found its way onto their shoulders. She didn't mind. In fact, she laughed, the kind of laugh that slips out when the heart forgets its burdens. And in that laughter, he felt something he had not felt in years, freedom, They walked without direction, letting the streets guide them. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they were silent, but the silence now was not heavy. It was sacred. Every glance, every brush of the hand, every pause between words carried a weight that was louder than sound. Finally, as they reached a quiet bridge overlooking the river, they stopped. The water shimmered under the glow of city lights, and the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, as though the world itself wanted to witness what was about to unfold. She leaned against the railing, her eyes reflecting both strength and softness. He stood beside her, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with a truth that demanded to be spoken. "You know," he said, his voice low, almost trembling, "I used to believe love was a kind of illusion, that it was just attraction, just a trick of the mind. But standing here with you, I realize it's more than that. It's not about pretending or chasing or proving. It's about being seen, completely, and somehow that's enough." She turned to him, her hair damp from the rain, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I used to think no one could ever see me," she whispered. "But you do, and it terrifies me, and heals me at the same time." For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Two souls, stripped of masks, stripped of fear, standing in the raw power of connection. The city moved on around them, cars rushing, lights glowing, people passing by, but they were in a world of their own. And then it happened. Not the dramatic kind of kiss the movies show, not the carefully scripted romance of books. No, it was softer, slower, almost hesitant at first, but in that hesitation was a kind of electricity no storm could rival. When their lips finally met, it wasn't just two bodies colliding. It was two worlds merging. It was the meeting of strength and vulnerability, of shadows and light, of brokenness and healing. It was the kind of kiss that does not just touch the skin, but imprints on the soul. The rain began to fall harder again, but neither of them moved. They stayed locked in that moment, as though afraid to break the spell. Because deep down they both knew, something inside them had changed forever. And here lies the deeper truth, the one most people miss. Real attraction is not about chasing beauty or playing games or creating illusions. Real attraction happens when two people dare to be real. When they stop running from their shadows and instead allow another soul to see them fully. That night, as they walked away from the bridge hand in hand, the world no longer felt heavy. Their burdens were still there, their pasts still etched into their hearts, but together, those weights seemed lighter. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. They did not know if the world would test them, challenge them, or try to pull them apart. But they knew this. Something rare had been born between them. Something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. And sometimes that is enough, because the greatest love stories are not the ones written in grand gestures or flawless perfection. They are the ones where two imperfect souls meet, and instead of turning away, they choose to stay. As they disappeared into the night, the rain washing over the streets, one thing became clear: this was not just romance. This was awakening. This was magnetism. This was the kind of connection that would echo in their hearts for years to come. And perhaps that is the secret we all search for, not just to love, but to be truly seen.